Hany was a strong believer in the prophetic saying, "None of you truly believe until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself."
وبص على خريطة العالم واكتب على كل بلد وكل مدينة علامة إن احنا نفتح في المكان ده كله.
I think Dr. Hany is one of the great philanthropists, one of the great humanitarians of our current times.
Dr. Hany El Banna for services to Islamic relief.
هاني البنا.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. Dear viewers, I'm pleased to meet you in a series of episodes to comment on the forum Global Dimensions of Humanitarian Work, which were held in Istanbul at the end of last month. I'm happy to have spontaneous and honest conversations with a distinguished guest, a symbol of the humanitarian work, a man who had a great credit for the achievement of this forum. He is the Sheikh of the humanitarian charitable work and its pioneer, Dr. Hany El Banna. Dr. Hany, welcome.
يعني أهلا وسهلا بك.
أهلا وسهلا. Dr. Hany, as all your followers know, you are actually in Istanbul. Can you tell us something about the forum where you are actually now?
It is Orphan Care Federation conference. It was one-day conference, international conference, to talk about the problems of orphans in different communities, different sites, different countries, especially in conflict zones and in displacement and in poor stricken area. And a lot of people came from the international, from different countries. At least 200-300 people were there with a lot of young orphans singing and showing their achievement and talent in drawing, in mathematics, in calculation, in arts, in recitation of Quran, in memorizing Quran, in different aspects of life. And as we believe that each child is born with talent, but either we leave the child to discover the talent, or his or her parents will discover her talent or his talent, or the school will discover the talent of the child. But I would like to remind every one of us that there's no child with no talent. Every child has a talent. And every human being has a talent as well, and more than one talent.
MashaAllah, MashaAllah. Let's return to the Global Dimensions of Humanitarian Work Forum, which were, as I mentioned, held in Istanbul at the end of last month. Before we continue, we will watch a short video about the forum.
فكرة الملتقى اليوم تتجلى بجعلنا نرى كيفية صناعة البناء الهيكلي للمؤسسات، والذي لا يقتصر على اللوائح والقوانين، وإنما يشمل الثقافة والفكر والتاريخ التي تعبر عن روح المؤسسة.
حللتم أهلا ونزلتم سهلا في هذا الملتقى المتميز الذي قام على إعداده والمشاركة فيه نخبة وكوكبة من جيل الرواد للعمل الإنساني الدولي.
Well, Dr. Hani, the first question will be about the motives and objectives of this forum and how the idea of this forum came to you.
الحمد لله والصلاة على رسول الله. From our experience as World Humanitarian Action Forum, whenever I travel somewhere globally and use Turkish airline, I stop back in Istanbul for a few days to consult some of the local organizations, whether it's Syrian or Yemeni or Iraqi or others, or young youth organization, to organize some local workshops for them. Could last for a day, could last for 2 days, could last for more than that. Even sometimes we used to go from Antakya to Gaziantep to Istanbul, sometimes Rehaniya, sometimes Orfa, and others. This has been going on for the last at least 8 to 9 years. This time we thought to make it different. We have been talking about what has been given to us as a syllabus or as curriculum for the workshops. Capacity building, good governance, bridge building, finance, and. This time we said enough is enough. We need to put our new philosophy of thinking. I discussed it with my colleague in World Humanitarian Action Forum in UK, as well as my colleague in الوكالة اليمنية للتنمية in Istanbul, وعام الدين الحديني. And وعام الدين, because he's coming from an operational organization background, he is very interested mainly in fundraising. There was something like tension between me and him of trying to bring the new dimensions. Because the new dimension does not represent direct fundraising. What are the new dimensions? Culture, values, morality, which is manner, belief, history, philosophy, okay, economy, impact of global politics and conflicts on humanitarian work, research and research studies and development, and others. This kind of struggle between the two schools of thought, we settled with a solution is to connect these 6 or 7 or 8 dimensions, media as well, okay, to fundraising or to fund development. So astonishingly, most of the people who came, all of them, did not meet one another for this gathering. We just told them to discuss what they are specialized at. But the outcome of their deliverable speeches and the experience was focusing on the 6 or 7 or 8 dimensions.
Yeah.
What I mentioned them before. And this was very astonishingly needed by the people who came to the forum, even who said what? Put a condition. Dr. Hammadi said that if you don't attend the 3 days, don't come. And all the attendees stayed for 3 days.
Yeah.
And we had another Zoom meeting, I think you organized it. Actually, it was attracting more than 200 people globally, from North Africa and West Africa and Middle East as well. So actually in the room was about 70 or 80 people. On the Zoom meeting was about more than 200 people, but constantly for 3 days. This is to show us how much those people were interested to discuss the new dimensions and say enough is enough for what have been discussing for the last 20 or 30 years. Let us draw our agenda, make our roadmap, and build our road for the future.
Well, it's clear that the forum was keen to discuss there's new dimensions, as you mentioned, the issue of values, morals, history, identity, and other. In your opinion, Dr. Hani, what is the importance of this approach in improving charitable and humanitarian work and finding solutions to its actual problems?
Yeah, I think as I mentioned to you, or maybe you might have met one of our colleagues was in the meeting. He gave me a study which done by a German university in 2001 or 2002, talking about what are the 5 or 6 or 7 challenges facing any organization. Number one was the cost of the operation. Then finding the proper human resources. And it went down to number 5, which talk about fundraising and access to fund. Let me tell you, Dr. Hammadi, if people only are focusing on fundraising or raising fund or raising money, what is the money will do to you if you don't have good governance, if you don't have good system, if you don't have good structure, if you don't have accountability system, transparency, following the international humanitarian standard, if you don't have good quality officers and managers to manage them, if you don't have all this, what the money will do for you? Do nothing. Will do nothing. So I'm not saying stop raising fund. I said raise fund, which is very important. But at the same time, look at the others as well. The others include the 7 or 8 dimensions. Why? Because every donation we receive is covered by culture of the donor. Inside it, inside the core donation is the philosophy of thinking of the donor, the values of the donor, the belief of the donor, and the history of the donor, and the approach of the donor. Whether all these contradict or agree with your local culture. Because you want their money, their fund, you bend your back to them and change your attitude to take the money from them. And this is what we call donor culture. We follow the donor culture, whether we agree with their culture or not. We follow the donor values, whether we agree with them or not. We follow the donor history, whether we agree or not. Because we want their money. Now what I'm saying, enough is enough. We have to create our own philosophy of thinking, to put our culture, to put our values, to put our morality, as well as to represent the history that we believe in.
In his lecture, and it was an important lecture, Dr. Isam al-Bashir presented an important grounding for a number of Islamic concepts related to humanitarian work. I would like first to ask you about the role of the Islamic reference in finding solutions for humanitarian work.
Humanitarian work is not something which is done today. It's as old as the history of creation of man. Animals do humanitarian work. Birds do humanitarian work. Insects do humanitarian work. Because they are living in societies, and they have leadership, and they have communities. Remember the story of the ant and the army of King Solomon alayhi salam. She was talking and shouting, "Oh guys, go inside your tunnels, otherwise Sulaiman will come and destroy you." She is warning her community that Sulaiman's army is coming and might actually destroy them. King Sulaiman said, وَعُلِّمْنَا مَنْطِقَ الطَّيْرِ. Allah has guided him, inspired him to understand the language of birds. So he knew what the birds want. We find nowadays in the flock of sheep or the flock of buffalo, the strong one, they stand as community to defend themselves against the lions, and sometimes defeat and throw the lions away. So the lion now started to become scared of the buffaloes, as you can see them nowadays, because they're living in communities. So don't ever say that we are actually inventing something new. إنهم إلا أمم أمثالكم or أمثالنا. They are nations or groups or communities like all of us. The ants, the bees, who are serving the queen in a very solid structure to protect the future generation who are coming. The structure of the community of the bees, the structure of the community of the ants, the structure of the community of the buffaloes, and all those living community, and the care that they show to one another. So humanitarian work is as old as humanity. All the religious people or the people who have values talked about it and done it, whether they are Muslims or non-Muslims. And they have contributed to the development of the humanitarian work globally. What's coming from China, from India, from Latin America, from Africa, from South Africa, from Middle East, from whatever it is. All those people have, because this reflects the unity of creation of man and the unity of the creator. That's why you have this kind of feeling which would change it into humanitarian and developmental work inside every species that Allah created to live on this planet. So when we come and say our Christian brothers started the modern and recent understanding of global humanitarian work, we thank them very much for starting this philosophy of thinking nearly 100 years ago. It's a structured one. Nowadays, we need to add value, because when my discussions with my colleagues from the International Committee of Red Cross or the British Red Cross, they said, we are Christian, and we started. We need to see your views as Muslims, your views as Jews, your views as Rastafari, your views as Sikh and others, because we need your contribution as well. They are very proud to start long time ago in the recent history. And now it's the time for us to add values. What they have done, we agree with most of what they have done, be 70 or 80%, we agree with them. But we need to add also our culture, because they need our culture. They need our philosophy of thinking. They need our moral values. They need our faith. They need our history. They need our experience. That's why we have the right to add what we believe in to the movement of the global humanitarian work, which started recently by the non-Muslims in at the end of the 18th century, beginning of at the end of 19th centuries, no, 19th centuries. Yeah, end of 19th century, beginning of the 20th centuries.
Well, talking about the Christians, our brothers, you are talking about one of the concepts Dr. Issam al-Bashir was talking about in his lecture. He said that humanitarian work is a global alliance, حلف الفضول.
That's right. That's right.
He also said, I quote, building a person, a believer, which he referred to as Sajid, is more important than building mosques. So, what is your comments on these two, حلف الفضول, global alliance, and building a person, a believer, is more important than building mosques?
Yeah, very good. This was in his in the first lecture of Dr. Assam about the values. Actually, alliance, which حلف الفضول should be for any community at any time. It's like this kind of syndrome that you have to follow all the time and to be all inclusive. And inside حلف الفضول, as Dr. Assam said, we should be preparing the individual who are going to pray in the mosque. Building the mosque or building a church or building a temple or building a synagogue is good, but not good enough. It's bricks. Unless we prepare the individuals who are going to pray there, are going to worship Allah there, these buildings is useless or are useless. So the priority here actually is to build a sajidin, which is like people like you and myself and others, before or at the same time when we build the structure itself of the mosque or the structure of the synagogue or the structure of the church or temple.
That is very important, and it links with the donors culture.
Yeah.
Dr. Saif Abdel Fattah, in his philosophical lecture, talked about the ship that saves humans, just like the ship of Noah did.
No.
Through your great field experience, how can charitable and humanitarian work really be the ship that saves, secures, and provides life to humanity?
The ship is very important. And this will bring us back to حلف الفضول or the alliance syndrome. Or the alliance philosophy of thinking, which does not exclude anybody. But to build a ship like this, you have, first of all, to have one very important condition. Freedom. Freedom. They have to have a space, civil liberty space. You can't build a ship if there's no civil liberty space. You can't build the ship if you don't have freedom in your own country. Nowadays, a lot of countries are reducing, minimizing, or removing the civil liberty space, clamping it down. Unfortunately, that's why without civil liberty space, you will never be able to build the ship. Because who is going to build the ship is the civil society organization. Whether they are working on humanitarian ground, social ground, developmental ground, advocacy, human rights, and others. Okay, those organizations are going to build the ship. If you remember, during the talk of Dr. Assam al-Bashir, he said, we are not living in the era of the encyclopedic individual, الرجل الموسوعي, like Imam al-Ghazali anymore. We are living at the era of the structured organizations or structured institution. So to go back to the challenge of building the ship, two things. Have to have civil liberty space, have to have freedom in the country. Otherwise, forget it. Because we have got many countries failing to build the ship in their own land. But in the West, we have many ships have been built because of the presence of these two, freedom and civil liberty space.
Okay, two conditions to build this ship. Let me talk about a concept that Dr. Hussein Al-Qazzaz, while speaking of the state of civilizational revival, حالة الانبعاث الحضاري, he recommended the necessity of linking humanitarian institutions with research centers. My question is, what is the reality of the interest of humanitarian institutions in research, and how can this be important to develop humanitarian institutions?
There is no development without research. There is no achievement without research. There is no pioneering without research. There is no community building without research. There is no proper fundraising without research. There is no community protection or peace building without research. Because research is the foundation of any program. But unfortunately, people in the West and the North believe in research institution and research studies. That's why they invest in think tanks and in research institutions. The people in the East, unfortunately, they don't believe in that. Not only sad that the Ummah of Muhammad, the Ummah of Iqra, thinking that Iqra is literacy and literacy, not actually extracting, researching, and. There's no much available fund for research studies in most of the organizations in the East or in the South. That's why without research, we'll be like blind men walking in a very difficult road, dark road, steeping or road, and not very well paved and prepared road. And there is no guidance. And most of our money will be spent wrongly. And they will never make any impact or progress or development. And this is a message to everybody, that they should have to invest in research, studies, research institution, think tank, and advocacy.
Well, let me, Dr. Hany, ask you about a current trend, which is linking the international donor to the local partner. What are the backgrounds of this networking, and how can it reflect positively on local development?
There's no successful program will be implemented in any part of the world without the local community. The local community could be local organization, could be local leaders, could be local gatekeepers, could be local workers. See, any international organization should not believe that because they have the fund and they are mature enough, they can work in isolation of the local community or the local organization. No, they can't. They will fail. And they spend more money than the money they spend when they work with local organization. Local organization is mandatory and very essential for any successful program funded by international organization or even local organization.
Well, some comments from some followers, Shawqiya Al-Absi, for example, and Hamad Haidar Al-Sharif commented that international organizations have started to cover the field themselves, and the work of local organizations has been suspended. Is this a fact? Is this true? And
It's true.
how can these organizations deal with it?
It is unfortunately true for many reasons. If you can remember the talks of Khalid Isa, the talk of Marwa Isa, the talk of Muhammad Najm about the funding, and in the second session, and a lot of international organizations are scared of giving their fund to local organization because of money laundering, because of the counter-terrorism policy, because of the corruption, local corruption. But this is not an excuse. You have the money to develop the local community. So you choose your own partner. While you are implementing, you have to develop, train, mentor, coach the local organization. to raise their own standard. But when you keep looking down at the local organization and not recognize them, not responding to them, not involving them, this is what we call, and it was mentioned by some of the speakers in the second session, humanitarian imperialism or humanitarian colonialism, unfortunately. And this is happening. This is happening, but this will not have the greatest impact. And this is wrong, because what is the period of time that any international organization will stay in a country? Maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years, maybe 20 years, maybe 30 years. But how long the local organizations and local people will be in the country or in the society? Forever. So you have to develop the forever organization while the temporary organization are in the country. And this is, and that's why Marwa Isa, Khalid Isa, and Muhammad Najm categorically said that this is could be considered as humanitarian imperialism. And even Marwa Isa said they have more local knowledge than the international organization, or they are more knowledgeable and have more experience than the international organization, because they know the know-how.
Allow me, Dr. Hany, to go for a short break and then come back to continue our discussion, especially about the presentations of the second session. Dear viewers, we'll meet after a short break.
النهارده هنتكلم عن رسالة الأمل. The message of hope coming from the agony of death and despair. رسالة الأمل تخرج من معاناة الموت والألم والتشرد واللجوء. We know that tens of thousands of people have crossed this border from Turkey to Greece to come here for a better life. نحن نعلم أن هناك عشرات الألوف من الناس أتوا من هذا الجانب في تركيا إلى هذا الجانب لكي يحاولوا أن يجدوا حياة هانئة سعيدة. And for you young men and women, وفي لكم أنتم أيها الشباب، عليكم ألا تيأسوا. Never, for you young men and women, never give up. Never surrender to the despair that people want you to have. لا تيأسوا على الإطلاق. لا تيأسوا مهما كانت الظروف. Never give up and never live in despair no matter what happened.
Well, Dr. Hany, in this short message from Greece, you talk about an important psychological condition, change condition, which is never give up, never surrender, hope. And also during your speech at the opening of the forum, you said that Syrians and Yemenis have turned from being refugees to productive, creative producers. Also, what attracted the most attention in Mr. Khalid Al-Isa's presentation was his talk about the experience of the Ata Association, which he chairs. He mentioned during his presentation that its annual budget reached $60 million. In your opinion, Dr. Hany, what is the key for this transformation from being asylum and suffering to production, creativity, and contribution to development?
Number one, come back to the same thing, which is freedom and civil liberty space. We find that the people in Turkey are the same refugees like the people in Lebanon, like the people in Jordan. And the political culture in Turkey allowing organizations to grow. allowing foreign refugees to establish local or international organizations, allowing them to open bank accounts, to receive fund, to transfer fund, and to make programs. Don't talk about Yemen and Syria. Anywhere, the condition or the two conditions are available: civil liberty space and freedom in the country. If they are there, you find any refugee or any internally displaced individual in his own or her own country will be different people. Because most of the people who left Yemen or left Syria are talented, educated, and have vision. I'll take you back more than 30 years ago when we started working in Bosnia in 1992. Our experience before that was a refugee who come out from his own country, like the people in Africa, poor, uneducated, and backward. But when we went to Bosnia, in the middle of Europe, we found that the refugees there are highly educated, actually speak many languages, and professional. The same. You look at the people, the Yemeni who are in Turkey, or the Syrian who are in Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan. The host government have or has to accommodate them and to change them from just becoming refugee in their own country into a very committed, productive individuals that they can build organization and help building the local society in the host country. This is regarding Lebanon, Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey. What is the other part of your question?
I was talking about the key of this transformation, and you just mentioned the host government part of these conditions.
That's right. That's right. Number two, as well, they have to sit down together, all these organizations, making forums, making coalition, building unions, and others. Without communication, would be more waste of time and money, unfortunately, in these areas. So after the freedom and civil liberty space, the organization themselves has to learn to sit down together.
Right. Some of the special criteria for obtaining funding that Mr. Mohammed Najm referred to in his presentation, such as gender, international sanctions, penalties, and others, these special criteria may sometimes clash with the convictions or ideologies of the local partner.
No.
So, what is your advice to the local organizations regarding dealing with these conditions?
Well, first of all, if the funding is conditioned by certain condition to contradict your values, your culture, your morality, don't accept it. Okay? That is the basic principles. Not because you are a small organization or a startup organization, you have to bend your back to different values, culture, morality, as well as philosophy of thinking, which can destroy the social fabric of your own society. It's very important. Very important to learn to say no. Very important to sit down with your colleague and make collective effort, tell them, no, we don't want your money. Regarding the area where actually movement restriction because of the conflict, You have to calculate the risk that you face and the risk that the local people are facing. And you have to be very open and transparent to everybody. I give you an example. In 2010, we wanted to go because the WFP World Food Program kicked out, so the Shabab in Somalia kicked out WFP. And they wanted to replace the system of WFP by bringing more Muslim organizations and start to make a negotiation with this group. This group is proscribed as terrorist organization by certain countries. Before traveling to Kenya at that time, 12 years ago, we wrote to the Foreign Office in London and to the American Embassy to explain to them our intention. We met with the American Embassy before traveling. Then when we landed in Nairobi, we met with the American Embassy to explain to them, the British Embassy, the Kenyan Foreign Office, the Sudanese Embassy, and the Egyptian Embassy. Because all of those are major players. And we met with the United Nations to explain to them what is our intention. Because it's a very high-risk area. To try to tell them that we are trying to create a passage and take the food material from WFP and let the Muslim church distribute it inside Somalia with these conditions. So here you are going to a very high-risk area, okay, as you said. But if you inform the main players, they will be observing you, and they will not accuse you or blame you of being a part of their activities. You have to be transparent, informative, and above board. Inshallah.
Inshallah. Ms. Marwa Isa, in her presentation, made an important sign, the sign which you have talked about in this episode, that local organizations are the most experienced and not international. Well, in Arabic, we say أهل مكة أدرى بشعابها. The people of Mecca know more about its reefs. From your experience, what are the elements of this expertise required from local organizations to convince the international partner?
First of all, we have to look at the partnership between the local and international on equal footage. Not because you are international, you have the fund, you'll be better than myself. You have the fund, I have the knowledge. You have the fund, I have the experience. You have the fund, I have the access. You have the fund, I have the solution. Without me, you can't work locally. You have the fund, I have the experience. Okay? But to start with, the local organization must know the structure of the society, the leadership of the society, the gatekeepers of the society, the local organization inside the society, the government organization, and have building bridges with the local organization and with the government organization in the society. Then it has to be registered first. Then it has to be structured, very well structured inside the organization. Have the policy, procedures, and bylaws inside this organization. Then it has to have history and good quality humanitarian workers. Without all these, none of the humanitarian organizations, international ones, will work with you. They have to have connection internationally as well. What is their experience? Have they been working with any other international organization before or not? With all these as condition, actually, will make the international organization to be comfortable to work with you or to fund you.
Mhm. Okay, Dr. Hani, we thank you very much for this distinguished episode and this kind sharing of your long experience in the humanitarian work. And for you, dear viewers, we are republishing the contents of the Global Dimensions of Humanitarian Work Forum, which were, as I mentioned, held in Istanbul at the end of last month. On the following 4 pages, the Facebook page of Dr. Hany El Banna, the World Humanitarian Action Forum, the International Center for Human Values and Cultural Cooperation, the Yemen International Agency for Development, and we are happy to receive your questions and comments on these pages. Dr. Hani, if you have a last message in this episode.
Yeah, last message, which I should have mentioned at the very beginning, since this second session was talking about funding.
Mm-hmm.
The most important element of funding is the individual.
Mm-hmm.
The individual. And the local funding coming to you from your community.
Mm-hmm.
It should not be less than 80% of the annual budget.
Mm-hmm.
The individual who gives you the $5 or the 5 dinar or the 5 riyal or 100 or 200, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Don't rely only on one big donor, whether it could be one organization or one millionaire or one billionaire. It's not sustainable. It's not sustainable. Don't let the government funding and the international institution funding to go more than 20% or 25%. Politically, it would be vulnerable. Let me give you some examples happened to us. In 1999, we wanted to go to Chechnya because we knew that there's some conflict will happen at that time. It was November. And we wrote to the Foreign Office in London. They never come back to us in a good time. So we decided, the organization decided to send me to Moscow. From Moscow, went to Nazran, which is the capital of Ingushetia, then went to Grozny. When the British government or the Foreign Office rang, the following Monday or Tuesday, Harun told them Dr. Hany El Banna is gone. They told them, please advise him not to go outside Moscow. He told them, we don't know where's he now. He can be in Ingushetia or could be in Chechnya. If we don't have our own local fund and we are depending and relying on the government funding, could we be able to make a decision like this? Or will be waiting for the government to give us some fund? When we went there, we made something called needs assessment. Always at time of conflict, there's a budget of $10,000 to start the work. Till you make need assessment and come back with a concept or with a proposal. After a while, when we saw the displaced people in Ingushetia, we thought to raise the fund $200,000. I rang Harun, which was my deputy, as well as the head of finance at that time. I told him that he was struggling, saying no. But at the end of the day, he said yes. Then after spending another week to have proper needs assessment, we raised the 100,000 into $1 million. Here, Harun was very upset. I said, no, I have no money. Forget about it. Why it went out from 10,000 to 100,000 to 1 million? Because we made the need assessment. We need to buy 3 layers tents with a stove, with a chimney to heat the tent and to cook inside the tent. Okay, we need to buy ambulances. We need to hire warehouses. We need to buy trucks. We need to build or to hire or rent clinics. These all come to us after we made a proper need assessment for 10 days. This was November 1999. You know how much we spent, not we raised? By March, April 2000, $2 million. Not raised, but we spent. Because we said that because the $100,000 which we asked Harun to give us was from our own fund. If we don't have this our fund, which is non-restricted fund, and we're still waiting to apply for the British government, we could not have done what we have done. The community trusted us later on, and most of this money, all this money came from the community, not from the government. Mm-hmm. It was about $3 or $4 million that were raised by March or April 2000, our own money. Mm-hmm. So coming back to the independence of fundraising, as well as the dependence syndrome, which come to the organization to control it because it's waiting for the government funding. This is actually a very classical example of how we managed to go to a high-risk area with our own fund and make a change and receive more and more fund because we were transparent, because we were actually committed, dedicated, and trustworthy. Actually, it went from $10,000 to spend $2 million in about 4 or 5 months.
MashaAllah. Thank you very much, Dr. Hany, for this distinguished episode and this kind sharing of your long experience in humanitarian work. Dear viewers, see you soon.
inshallah. خالد الفقراء عشان تسعد.
Dr. Hany was a strong believer in the prophetic saying, "None of you truly believe until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself."
وبص على خريطة العالم واكتب على كل بلد وكل مدينة علامة ان احنا نفتح في المكان ده كله.
I think Dr. Hany is one of the great philanthropists, one of the great humanitarians of our current times.
Dr.